Raymond, thank you so much for joining me.
Delighted, Billy.
So it's our very first podcast. I appreciate you willing to venture into these waters
Well,
with us.
start at the bottom and build up, I always say. So it's a great start.
We're kicking off with a bang, I think, here. But so I want to talk to you a little bit about your work in journalism, and especially obviously in Catholic media, given your current role and the work that you've done. But before we get into that, were you raised Catholic? Are you a Credo Catholic?
I was raised Buddhist. No,
okay.
I was raised Catholic. I grew up in New Orleans.
Okay.
So when you grow up in a place like New Orleans, I always say the Protestants are Catholic in New Orleans because you're surrounded by this Catholic culture.
Yeah.
And it's so audacious. It's so sensate. We've got festivals. We've got food we eat on certain days tied to feast days and saints celebrations, and of course Christmas and Easter and our big Lenten preparation, Mardi Gras. All of those things draft the whole society in. So for me, that was a big part of my upbringing. But faith was like the air you breathed. It was nothing peculiar. I didn't have to do anything else to be Catholic. Everybody was Catholic. Everybody I knew was Catholic. I didn't meet a Protestant until I was 18.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that when you left New Orleans?
Yeah. When I went to NYU, then I married one. But she's no longer, but she was. But so I literally had no encounter with anybody who wasn't Catholic. I mean, I'm sure I met them at the deli or at a Mardi Gras parade, but I didn't know any Protestants, which gives you a sense of Catholicism in New Orleans and how it still lived. So for me, I get a little squeamish when I hear people talking about, I'm a Catholic journalist, or I'm a Catholic this, or I'm a Catholic that. I don't know what that means. Your faith informs and overflows through you and through your work. It's not a badge you wear. And I guess I'm always a little suspicious of people who, and I hear it a lot. I mean, I hear it a lot. Who, I'm a Catholic journalist. Well, just be a good journalist. If you're a good journalist, we'll know you're Catholic by your journalism, and we'll decide if you're a good Catholic journalist or not. But I'm a little more Graham Greene on this. Greene was, of course, one of my favorite novelists, and Greene always considered himself a Catholic or novelist who was Catholic, rather than a Catholic novelist. And I feel the same way about everything I do, not just this, my work, my fiction, when I'm producing things, when I'm writing things, all of that. It's part of who I am. So naturally, my faith is going to bleed through it.
Was that a challenge when you were, because you started out in secular journalism, you worked for the Associated Press and the New York Observer. Was that ever an issue? Because I think for a lot of people, we don't know what we mean when we say journalism sometimes. Are we talking about the old, Pulitzer and Hearst days where we're talking objective journalism, or what we're seeing now where it's almost like punditry with the name of journalism associated? It's hard to know. Was that a challenge for you, being a journalist who was Catholic and letting that inform everything you did?
No, because I knew a lot of Catholic journalists and people who went to Mass, lived their faith, were very good people, but they were tough journalists too. And to me, it's a gift. It's all a gift. You have gifts that are given to you. We have an obligation to work on those gifts, perfect those gifts as best we can, and then offer those gifts to people and to God. So I consider journalism part of that. And as press, our job is to press for answers. We ask questions, we press for answers. Now, people don't like those questions always. I have found myself in the days gone by when I was a political reporter, both at the AP. Later, I was with Evans and Novak. Bob Novak was the premier, kind of the dean of the Washington Press Corps. Bob wrote a column 3 days a week, which I helped him with. We broke news every column. Every column had some new nugget in it that would shake and rattle the people on Capitol Hill or at the White House. He was a huge mentor to me. But Bob was a shoe leather journalist. He went out and met people, worked sources, taught me how to do that well. And we had a deadline every 3 days a week. You had that deadline. You had to hit it. So that was part of my training. He also took over Crossfire when Buchanan left. So I was producing that and working on the column each week, which is great prep for what I do now. But I've never left. I have my work at EWTN. I'm certainly known for that. But I've never really left I don't feel we're on an island. The Catholicism is an island. And I want to shake everybody from this conception because it irritates the heck out of me. It's a little like the boy from New Orleans. Catholicism is the air you breathe. Now, there's paganism in that air too.
Right.
There's voodoo in that air too. Not much of it, frankly. It's mostly Catholic. But when you come to a living faith, it's not an island that you forego the world for and travel over to your Catholic pure island. I don't know where that island is. It's not even in Rome, so I don't know where that exists. But when you find it, send me a note because I'll go there. But in the meantime, we're called to engage and live in the real world. And the real world is a Catholic world. But I never left secular journalism. I'm a contributor to Fox. I was a contributor to CNN. I write for secular publications. My publisher has always been Random House, the biggest publisher in the world. I've never published with a Catholic house. So, again, we are to live our faith through our work in the world, not in some adjunct island. And I think the more we do that and the more we adopt the mindset that you go into the little island of purity, and that's where we will thrive and grow. You'll never touch the world or change a heart that way. Mother Angelica didn't do that. This was a woman who was on Bloopers and Practical Jokes when she was pushing her show. She went on Joan Rivers' show. She went on Larry King Live on CNN. She was in the middle of the world. She brought her faith and exposed it in the middle of the world and challenged it. That's what you're called to do. Not go to some, conference on the weekend and play something with no effect. And that irritates me. So now I've gotten off my little – let me step off my soapbox and resume the interview. But yeah, so I've never really in my mind, in my heart, when I write for people. And I write for a broad audience, and I broadcast for a broad audience. And half of my audience at EWTN is not Catholic.
I'm not surprised.
Half. They're Protestants, they're seekers, they're non-believers, they're people who are just fascinated because of who they see on there.
Right.
Not me, by the way. It's the guest. And the show is about the guest.
Yeah.
And if people want to know why has it lasted all these years, we're in our 22nd year or something now. I attribute all of that to my team who understands what we're doing each week. There are only 3 members of that team and me. That's it. Any show of this, an hour-long show would have 13 people working on it, 12 people.
That's really remarkable.
24 people. We have 3 people. But everybody knows their roles. Everybody's doing multiple roles, and we kind of move as a unit. And we've been together. My executive producer, Chris, has been with me for 19 years. So those bonds you can't fake. Relationships you can't fake. And insight. As Bob Novak taught me, bring people something new every column, and I do that with the show. Give them things in context, news in context. Today, social media has conditioned us to be headline readers. Our job is to put it in context so people understand why this really matters and how your first rush judgment of a story may not be what the story is about. So I like to dig deep. We have the time to dig deep. I love having 10 and 15 minutes for an interview. I can get a lot in. And sometimes we go longer depending on who that is. So the show thrives on that idea, that mindset, and on the quality of the guests. But it's never about me. It's about that guest. They are the center of the show and always have been.
You've got so many things in there that I want to come back to.
Yep.
One is you talked about when you have a gift, you have an obligation to share it. That's what God gives us the gift for. When did you notice that you had the gift for journalism and the storytelling that you're talking about? Obviously, it was cultivated by some mentors along the way. Sure. But when did you know this is where my life's work is going to be?
Well, I really, throughout high school, when I was very young, when I was a Boy Scout, I loved the theater. I still love the theater. And I studied. I went to NYU. I studied with some of the best acting teachers in the world. All of them dead now. Uta Hagen, Stella Adler, Sandy Meisner, who trained Robert Duvall and scores of people, Bobby Lewis, Beatrice Straight, who was won an Academy Award for Network movie she did in the 70s. I had great mentors, but they were all of that generation. These are people who really came into their own in the 30s, 40s. Stella Adler, who was I think she was 90 when I studied with Stella, taught me a great thing. First of all, we had classes every day. We had studio 3 times a week, but we rehearsed every day. And you would rehearse all week and then present a scene for Stella from a play. And when I say present a scene, costume, props, scenery, the whole thing you brought in and presented. And it was just a scene, 10 minutes maybe, 8 minutes. She would brutalize you in front of everybody and critique everything from the moment you walked in the door. That's a fraud. Stop. You'd walk in the door and she'd stop you. And she was right. She had a very critical and cruel and wonderful eye. But she taught us something, and two things. One was, in your choice lies your talent, Stella would say all the time. In your choice lies your talent. Every choice you make reveals your talent and perfects your talent. And the other thing is, when you get on the platform, and I think it's not only theatrical platforms, any platform, when you stand on the platform, you're there to teach humanity, remind human beings of who they are, that they're not just matter moving through time, but they have hearts and they have souls. And art reminds us that we have a soul. Stella Adler, who is a secular, by her own admission, a Jewish broad from Odessa, and that's how she described herself. Stella had that mindset. So you talk about faith, Catholicism. Stella Adler saved my faith. That's who saved my faith. Because I was 19 years old. The people around me really weren't going to church. Stella reminded us, if you want to play the great roles, if you want to play kings and princes, the only way to do that is to aspire to something higher, to God. And you had to have a soul to do that. And her critique of the age we were in was, the reason you have such small, petty, deadly theater and movies are because souls have become small and petty, and there's no grandeur, there's no God, there's nothing larger. And though she herself probably wasn't religious, she was certainly a believer, and she taught me that and really reconnected me to my faith. Because I saw how it was all one thing. The talent, the art, the life was all bound together in the faith. It was all one thing. And I now see that much more vividly. So Stella was a huge influence on me. Yes, I'm a journalist, but when you peel it all away, I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. Whether I did it as an actor, whether I do it as a director, as a producer, a writer of children's books, the show each week, it's all storytelling. Two kids walked into the forest. They heard a growl. Horrible things happened. That is how it starts. And no matter what the story is, it starts, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
You told us such fascinating stories about a couple of your mentors there. The one that's probably the most well-known, at least probably to this audience, would be Mother Angelica. Talk a little bit about your relationship with her, and what's the greatest lesson she taught you?
Oh, boy. Mother was my mentor, a dear friend, like a grandmother to me in many ways. We grew to love each other. The first time I met her, I interviewed her in 1995 for a magazine here in D.C. It was a cover story. I did not know who she was. My mother and grandmother watched her in New Orleans. I had no clue. We walked in. I did my research. I was impressed by her. Walked into Birmingham, Alabama, did the interview. We hit it off instantly. I think because I'm half Sicilian, she's full-blooded Calabrese, and the Italians are a little bit like magnets. When if you're paisans, it all just kind of works. I didn't worship her either. So many people came into her presence would kind of, oh, Mother, it's so wonderful to see. I didn't do that because I really didn't know who she was. So I related to her as I would my grandmother or my mother, who are strong Italian women. And I realize now I've been surrounded and blessed by strong women in my life. My agent was a woman, Mother Angelica, my mother, my grandmother, Stella Adler, my wife, Laura Ingram. Strong women have sort of haunted me my whole life. But I think part of it is because of my upbringing, I'm not afraid of a strong woman. In fact, I like the challenge. I like the interaction. And so there's a mutual respect. And I'm not intimidated by strong women. I like that. In fact, I enjoy collaborating with them. So Mother and I hit it off. She asked me if I would help start the news operation in 1996, and I told her no because I was talking to a news operation here and working in D.C. on Capitol Hill. As it turns out, she hounded me. I ended up going to Birmingham. Through a long series through years, we enjoyed each other's company. I could always make her laugh. and together we would laugh a lot. One of the nuns said we were more like playmates than than an employer and an employee. We had a difficult patch, which I write about in Her Grand Silence, which is the sequel to the biography, which is the last 15 years of her life. And I had originally not intended to tell the story, but I thought it was important. We were doing a papal trip to Cuba, which Mother had basically mortgaged the whole network to do this trip because it was like $2 million, and she didn't have $2 million, but she signed the thing anyway. And we did the coverage. But someone had convinced her that I was going to politicize the coverage of Fidel Castro, that sterling, wonderful, holy soul, that I might cast aspersions on his greatness. And that rankled some people in the South American bureaus who were worried about keeping good relations with their countries. I get it. It was personal for them. And they didn't want me saying horrible things about him, and I didn't. But she was convinced, and people had spoken to her over many weeks telling me that I would politicize the coverage. And in a meeting of about 30 people, she blew up at me about how I had a worldly interviewing style and I was going to politicize the coverage, and on and on and on. And I let her finish. And when it was over, I folded my arms petulantly and said, "You finished?" She said, "I'll let you know when I'm finished." And I said, "Oh, no, you're finished." And I got up and walked out. And I threw my things in my bag and my boxes, and I was gone. And I told Doug Keck, who came in, who was then VP of programming, I said, this is not going to work. I got to go. This is intolerable. He said, "Calm down. We got the coverage tomorrow." I said, "Okay, as a professional, I'm going to do this coverage, and then I'm leaving. I'm finished." So I did the coverage. First night, that was the night the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke. Bill Clinton is now indicted. Washington is collapsing. All the networks pulled out of Cuba. Every one of them. They were all there. Everybody pulled out but EWTN. So we had wall-to-wall coverage of John Paul's visit there. It ended up being this huge thing, and it was great counter-programming because people did not want to watch wall-to-wall Monica Lewinsky.
Right.
At 11 o'clock that night, I come back into the office. Long story short, phone rings. "Hello? Sweetheart, it's Mother Angelica." I said, "Uh-huh." "That was the most beautiful, professional, uplifting. It was inspirational, wasn't it, sisters?" "Oh, yes, Mother, yes." "Inspirational coverage we've ever seen. The Lord was so powerful there. No one could have done it with the professionalism, the clarity. Oh, the clarity. Wasn't that great, sisters?" "Yes, Mother, yeah." It was just beautiful. Beautiful in every way. Best coverage we've ever done here at EWTN. I said, "Is this an apology?" "Good night, sweetheart." But that really was, that's as much apology as I was going to get from her at that point. But she often said of that moment, and it's true, she said, "Raymond and I had our thing once. We had words once. He didn't get to use any of them." And she said, but that event really brought us together. But what I learned and what she learned in that moment is we did love each other. She knew I respected her. And though I stood up to her, I didn't defy her and I wasn't cruel. And she ultimately knew I was right. I wasn't politicizing the event, and I didn't. That built such a deep trust. That is why I could write the biography, and she told me the very personal, intimate things that I don't know if I would have told anyone, particularly a biographer. But boy, am I glad she did.
Wow.
She's an important witness. One of the great women of the 20th century, the great women of the church. What Mother taught me most was, and I use it every day, live in the present moment. You live in the present moment, and most people don't. They're in the past, in their head, stewing over the slights of yesterday, or petrified about what's coming tomorrow. You can't. You have to be 100% right here in this moment. Give yourself to this entirely. The rest will take care of itself. That was really her providential way of dealing with the world. It's how I deal with the multitudinous things that I do and the projects. And so I think of her, and she's with me every day.
She has one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard on integrity, and I think about it regularly, especially in the work I do for the church, which is she was saying about EWTN that people won't remember what we did as much as how we did it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, with that, talk about that is integrity. That's how you carry yourself. You know, whether I'm dealing with a crisis or just hard work, challenging things, managing a schedule. People will remember how I did this. They won't remember exactly
true.
what I did today.
No, that's
and
true.
I've always taken that with me, and I hope
And she
listeners
wasn't.
would.
And here's the thing I've learned about saints, and I've known a few. Saints are hard to deal with. Saints are tough. And they're tough because the world is tough. And it kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier. John Paul II, Mother Teresa, Mother Angelica, I knew them all, was very close to particularly John Paul and Mother Angelica. Teresa I knew and interviewed several times and had a chance to watch her up close. All three of them were tough as nails. They did not live in that island of perfection that I talked about earlier. They toughed it out and fought in the world where they were beaten not only by the world but by their own. And every step was a step of cruelty and pain and torture and punishment. But they were so mission-driven. They were like laser focused on where they were going, all for God, that they didn't care about all of that. And when you're around a personality like that, that's hard. That can sometimes be difficult because they're not worried about how you feel today, precious. They're worried about achieving this for God. And you're either on the train or you're out. You're going to get run over. And as Father Benedict Rochelle, the great Franciscan, once said, who knew Mother Angelica and Teresa quite well, Mother Angelica's tough, but Teresa, she's a bulldozer in a marshmallow forest. He said, that's right. That is true. They were formidable women, and John Paul was the same. Will of iron. Amazing people. So I often remember that. Saints are not always pretty.
You talked about journalism being a kind of a dedication to truth, and that you don't have this. You're not a Catholic journalist. You're a journalist that is who happens to be Catholic. Obviously, Mother Angelica was very dedicated to truth.
Yes.
A lot of these people that you're talking about obviously devoted their whole lives to it. When we're in kind of this age of fake news, and Pope Francis talked about this in his World Communications Day message,
right.
About the importance of authenticity and truth, especially within the means of communications, modern communications. I think there's two pieces to that. There's one on more of the quote-unquote corporate side of the professional news tellers, folks like yourself, but also on the individual, that what we're sharing is productive, that what we're sharing is reflecting the good when it's there, the bad maybe when it's there, but not finding negative opportunities everywhere we go.
Right.
No matter what we find a way to get another dig in and push that dagger a little deeper. What are your thoughts about kind of the fake news phenomenon that we're seeing that's proliferated through everyday individuals?
Yeah, well,
what are your thoughts on this?
Fake news is a fun label that Donald Trump affixed to this phenomenon. And he, in many ways, represents, I think, something of our age in his ability to coin phrases and brand things, and they're memorable. This is why he won the presidency. There's something to be learned from that. But the fake news thing has been with us forever. You read the founding of the Republic. You read papers from the Revolutionary period to the present. Fake news has always been with us. It's used to manipulate. It's used to shape public opinion about issues or people. I would argue, because I know the inner workings of newsrooms and how stories are pitched and the role of publicists, 80% of it is fake news. 80% of it is omission. So you as a consumer and me as a journalist that people trust, I have to take that and put it in a wider context. That doesn't make you many friends. Truth tellers are not valued. I will tell you that.
Yeah.
Look, I find myself in the unenviable position of having to ask tough questions about both our government as well as our church. That's my job. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. I'd much prefer to go write about Will Wilder and Perilous Falls. That's far more edifying to me. I enjoy it more. I love talking to children. I've spoken to almost 100,000 of them in schools around the country. That feeds me. I love that. But the journalist part of it is a hard walk because, as Mother said when we founded EWTN News, you have a commitment to truth. People are going to trust you in a way they don't trust others. And we're not beholden to anybody. We're not beholden to anyone. Our viewers support what I do.
Right.
Now, that's why I don't like the idea of sponsorships and things. I don't like that idea. I don't want the world over sponsored by any one group, because the minute that happens, they're going to want hooks in you. And I see that in my secular life. That's part of secular news. You have advertisers. You have other forces, corporate forces that lean on you. I don't have those strictures at EWTN, and I treasure that. And the day that goes away, I'll stop doing this. I don't need that. I mean, it's just not. It would not be freeing. And Angelica told me many years ago, I know you could go anywhere you want, but you won't be free there. Here, you can be free to speak the truth. And I remember that.
Do your secular news media friends envy that freedom that you've
got? A
little
bit. I mean, look, you also have to realize I have a platform that's different. This is a different platform, and I can occupy multiple platforms, but this one is particular. I don't think they envy, because look, they're getting immediate response from the politicos and from world leaders, and as you can imagine, the financial remuneration is a bit more robust over there than here. So I don't think they envy that. But there is something to be said about being able to speak the truth in and out of season, and I love that we have that. It's a gift. That's a gift.
Last question. For a young person who's looking to become a journalist, and they're entering like you did, they're not necessarily looking to do secular or religious media. They just want to be a good journalist. What would be your advice to them?
Be curious. Get off your phone and your social media and interact with real people. That's where life is. Friends are not on a computer screen. You have no friends on a computer screen. You have people who might be interested or fascinated or hateful toward you, but you don't have friends out there. Your friends are encountered in life, over meals, through good times and bad, in church, on the street. That's where your friends are, and you need to interact with the world at large. And many young people don't have that experience. They can't even read human cues on the face or vocal inflections, like when you're telling a wry joke. They don't laugh because they don't realize it's a joke.
Right.
That comes from a lack of human contact. It would be like bringing someone from some isolated culture in, and they just have no frame of reference. So first of all, get into the parade of life. It's a grand time. B, find a discipline, something you're really interested in. Finance, sports, agriculture, the law. Pursue that discipline. Learn it well. Make contacts in that discipline. Then as a journalist, you can cover that thing and really mine it with a depth that your peers will not have. I mean, I could walk out of here today and go cover Capitol Hill or the White House like nothing because I was immersed in it for years. And I really knew and understood how the sausage is made, where the Appropriations Committee is and how they operate and how the staffers do this. And there's a legal drafting committee on Capitol Hill. All they do is bipartisanly draft legislation at the request of a congressman. That's knowing those key people and how things filter down is critical, or you really don't understand this. You have a layman's understanding, and you can't interpret events. You can't go deep. And today we need depth, not shallow. We have enough shallow. We are the CGI of news today. We just cover the surface. It's all spectacular explosions. This one doesn't like that one. Did you hear what Trump said about this one? Who cares? That doesn't affect your life. I try to cover things that touch and affect people's lives. And I would tell young journalists, have a life, figure out what life is, and then figure out how your work can enrich the lives of others or challenge and shake the lives of others. That's what we're called to do. And I think that's what we're called to do as journalists, and I think it's what we're called to do as Catholics. You know that works out?
Yeah, very good. So for people that want to find out more about the various things you're doing, like you said, you've got children's books, you've written biographies, and you're obviously a journalist and a host here. What would you recommend? Where do people go first?
They can go to the website, RaymondArroyo.com. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook if you have a stomach for that sort of thing. I post where I'm going to be and things coming up and news, and I try to keep people informed and cut through the blather. I'm on Fox on Wednesdays and Fridays on the Ingram Angle. I do segments on culture, faith, the things that matter. The things that matter. Sometimes we get into politics, but mostly I focus on those areas. The Will Wilder series, I have the third book coming out at the top of March in 2019. The other two books are out in hardback and paperback. Great for kids, 8 and up. It's an adventure really for the whole family. I say it's for kids, but I have readers in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And then I do have 8 to 12-year-olds reading it as well, girls and boys, and that's been fascinating and wonderful.
That's wonderful.
Writing for kids.
Thank you for being so generous with your time. I know you've got a lot going on. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thank
Raymond
you,
Arroyo,
Billy.
thank you so much.
Thank you, and my old diocese of Arlington, which I miss every day.
Thank you very much.